Hey, good afternoon or good morning to everybody. This is, if you're, just to make sure you're in the right place, you're joining a webinar from Viacode on a practical guide to building a cloud center of excellence. On behalf of Viacode, I wanted to welcome you to our webinar series, and it is a series. I'm Scott Harris, I'm the president of Viacode, and I'm joined today by Victor Mushkatin, our CEO. First, let me tell you who we are. We were founded as Avicode back in 2001 as an enterprise software development company. So we know what it's like to build and manage production application software. In 2004, we launched our own product called Intercept Studio that was used by thousands of companies throughout the world to manage and provide operational insights into production applications. That product was sold to Microsoft in 2010 and embedded in their System Center platform, or SCOM, as you might know it. At that time, Avicode was renamed Viacode since Microsoft got the Avicode name in that deal. Our CTO was Victor Mushkatin at the time, who went to Microsoft as part of the deal. Victor, as I said, is here today with us as our CEO to talk about this practical approach to building a cloud center of excellence. Victor doesn't like when I talk about him on these webinars. He gets a little bit embarrassed by it, but I want to tell you a little bit about his background since I think it's impressive and it's important for you to know who's talking today. Victor spent 8 years at Microsoft as a group program manager on the SCOM and Azure product teams, helping Microsoft to envision and build their ops management strategy. His last role at Microsoft was as the group program manager for the Azure Insights tool. And in 2018, Victor returned to Viacode. So we continue to leverage our operation and monitoring experience and our ongoing work with Microsoft product teams to provide products and services that are specifically built for Azure. Our objective is to provide our clients with a virtual cloud center of excellence to help them with Azure migration, optimization, management, and modernization. Those of you that are familiar with our monthly webinar series already know that it's our objective to provide informational webinars targeted at professionals like you interested in cloud-related topics. We welcome your feedback on ideas for future topics. As I said, today's topic is a practical game plan for building a cloud center of excellence. There's a lot of material out there on this subject. On the subject of cloud center of excellence. And for many, the idea of building a cloud center of excellence seems like a luxury that few companies have the resources to afford. It's not possible for us to tell you everything you need to know today about building a cloud center of excellence, but we can certainly help get you started. If you'd like to ask any questions, you'll just click on the questions section of your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll answer your questions during the webinar. We'll answer them at the end or via email as a follow-up. So with that, Victor, what are you planning to cover today?
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. Today we will talk about the Cloud Center of Excellence. And as Scott mentioned, it's a pretty big area. So first, I would want to make sure that we are on the same page with respect to understanding what the Cloud Center of Excellence actually is. And then I'd like to share some of the approaches that we see work out in the wild for companies implementing that discipline, whether it's a cloud team or cloud center of excellence. And I would like to highlight some of the outcomes through a number of examples. So cloud center of excellence, first and foremost, it's a actually cross-functional teams that is chartered to carry on company's cloud strategy. There could be many different stakeholders that are part of that team, but there are I would say three major areas. First, it's a financial management. Second, it's operational excellence. And third is security. In some organizations, there could be a number of many different peoples. Some small organizations, you have fewer peoples and people share the same roles, but usually there are like people that are responsible for working together with finance. That's a cloud economist role, if you will. There are people who are focusing on operations. That would be the cloud operations manager role, and people who are concerned about security. So when we kind of dive a little bit deeper, what those pillars, what those areas of Cloud Center of Excellence focus on, you can see that from financial management, you primarily focus on aligning cloud investments with your business initiatives, business directions. That's where you look into your TCO and whether you in fact lowering the TCO of your platform, because for many organizations, that's one of the goals, transitioning to the cloud. That's essentially a discipline where you focus on ROI analysis. That's where you enforce internal accountability through chargebacks and showbacks. Operational excellence pillar, if you will, focuses on uninterrupted operations of your cloud infrastructure. That's where you think about SLAs, efficiency of your infra, consistency of your infrastructure. That's essentially the main focus for your operational pillar. And the last key pillar is security. That's where you focus on increasing the depth of your security and focusing on eliminating essentially vulnerabilities. That's you think about your RBAC, on thinking about access and identity. That's where you considering various compliance requirements and threat management. And all those three areas cannot exist effectively and efficiently in the organizations without a really well-structured process and collaboration between Cloud Center of Excellence team and all different divisions or parts of your organization. So collaboration is a must for effective Cloud Center of Excellence.
So Victor, that's great. So now that you've talked about a bit about the kind of the best practice Cloud Center of Excellence and what that looks like, I wanted to ask the audience a question about the state of their cloud environment. So I'm going to launch a question here. It's a polling question. Take a second for those of you on the web, for those of you on the webinar, go ahead and answer that. The question is, what's the state of your Cloud Center of Excellence? Is it dedicated, meaning there's a dedicated group of people that are doing it? Is it fragmented, distributed across a bunch of people? Is it all me? You're the Cloud Center of Excellence. Does it not exist at all, or maybe you just don't know? I mean, I'm expecting that we'll get a bit of answers from a bunch of different people, and I'm starting to see the answers come in. So I think we have a pretty good idea right now on the answers, although they're still coming. I'm going to go ahead and close this here. One last second. All right, you got it. And then I'm going to share the results with you. And as you can see, interesting distribution. For some of you, it's all you. That's a small percentage of it. For most of you, it's fragmented, which I think is what we commonly see. For those of you who had a dedicated group, that's actually pretty good. We don't see that all that often. It usually is an indication of kind of the size of the organization, but also the level of commitment. And some of you just don't know, which is also not uncommon. Putting in place a Cloud Center of Excellence sounds like a great idea. But as Mike Tyson once said, the boxer, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And from our perspective, IT organizations get punched in the mouth just about daily. And maybe that has something to do with why some of you may not have a fully dedicated, fully robust Cloud Center of Excellence in place. I mean, Victor, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you look from the dimensional research finding, about a quarter of respondents hesitate implementing Cloud Center of Excellence, and the reasoning is different for different companies. Some, for example, think that they're not using cloud enough. Some things that cloud's changing so rapidly they're not ready to codify. Some things that some people think that they don't have enough executive sponsorship to implement Cloud Center of Excellence practices. What we've seen is that, and that's the same research shows, that without formalizing your cloud approach and cloud implementation, you waste money, and on average, you waste about 30% of all your cloud spend. And that's what we see when we come to work with a customer on their cloud environment. We see that there are a number of vulnerabilities that are not addressed because there is no methodical approach for implementing Cloud Center of Excellence. And third area, we see a pretty significant gap that in many cases, IT ops have no clue what's going on out there. So Azure is a slightly different beast, and a lot of Azure assets are not monitored. And when something goes south, you rely on customers telling you that something is wrong. So As Scott mentioned, Cloud Center of Excellence is a pretty big topic, and the goal for today's presentation is to somewhat demystify the approach, how you can implement that, and probably provide it in a way that would help you think about it in a structured way. So what we're thinking about, the way we're looking at Cloud Center of Excellence, we're looking at through the maturity curve. And each of those pillars can progress through maturity curve at its own pace, pretty much independently from each other: financial management, operations, or security. And there are three very distinctive phases of maturity for your Cloud Center of Excellence team. There are visibility, automation, and alignment. On the visibility phase, your primarily concerned is to basically expose some metrics. Without a measure, you cannot manage, right? So you need to know what's going on to establish baseline before you can do any kind of improvements. On automation level, you are codifying certain best practices. And on alignment, you have a business requirements that come in and you need to address them. For example, for financial management, at the base level, you need to focus on establishing essentially cost center allocation and showbacks and chargebacks. Where you move towards automation phase, maturity phase, that's where you enforce certain requirements. For example, you enforce creation of resources in most cost-efficient region, or you disallow creation of ultra SSD hard drives, right? So you codify your best practices. And when you go to alignment phase, that's where you start thinking about COGS, where business is coming to you and saying, hey, you need to lower your COGS. I remember when we started up on site, we also were going through similar maturity curve. And I remember moving from previous previous status to GA. That's where Microsoft Finance came and was very hard on forcing us to address COGS issues, where we had to lower our COGS 100 times. So that was a pretty big challenge. But the point here is that you get to that challenge once you have your product in a pretty decent place from the maturity standpoint. And then you are lowering your cost. So for us, it was 100 times. That was a pretty big push for us. The same maturity curve is applicable to operations, where at the beginning, you just need to provide visibility for your availability, performance, capacity monitoring. You need to provide some kind of reporting so you know what's going on. When you go to automation, that's where you start thinking about capitalizing on cloud elasticity with, let's say, auto scale. That's where you start thinking about using essentially turning on or turning off infra during weekends to save some money. Like, you're thinking about right size. That's the automation phase. And on the alignment phase, similar to financial management, that's where business comes in and tells you that, you know what, in order to support our customers, you need to support certain SLA. And for us, for example, again, when we were running up on site, I remember in early stages, there is a billing integration from, let's say, any Azure service to a main Azure billing service. And I remember when there was a LSI lifeside incidents on our integration, and we did not provide billing data for portion of up on site to Microsoft OLAP billing service. And guess what happened? Because Microsoft has certain SLA that Microsoft cannot backtrack the billing, portion of up on site customers got up on site for free. So the point here, at that level, you are mature enough to really look into your SLA and support those SLA. And that's on the final kind of maturity curve. And the last piece is security, last pillar, where you start again with visibility. You need to start detecting some issues, some threats, some attacks. Then you go to automation, where you force certain best practices to prevent security drift. And the last phase, again, when business comes in and tells you that, hey, you need to support SOX, or you need to support ISO, whatever compliance requirement might be. Again, from my personal experience, when we were going to GA, the GDPR was an extremely important compliance requirement that we had to support as a global service for Azure. So I almost hear questions that, yeah, it's a great theory, but where would I start, and what should I do? Like, what tools out there that would help me in this journey? And another questions that we see customer ask is, where do I know that I can move from one phase of maturity to another phase? What are the success metrics? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through each phase of maturity individually and talk about what, how, and how to measure success, essentially. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with visibility, maturity phase, and financial management. And usually at this phase, what we recommend focus customers on creating budgets, tag resources, and establish cost alerting. And for that, we recommend to use management groups to create a hierarchy of your all your assets in Azure, and use Azure cost built-in functionality to track your progress. And with respect to success metrics, you can track cost of all untagged resources, percentage of resources with proper tagging, and percentage of resources with budgets and alerts. And if you look, Microsoft provides this management group that allow you to create essentially a hierarchy of your assets. And what we help customers, and I'm sure that you can do it, you usually typically create tags on various levels and auto-propagate throughout that hierarchy. That significantly simplifies tag management and financial reporting. We recommend you to implement budgets, and what you see here is I have a demo rig where you see that so far I spent about $1,000, a little over $1,000. My budget is $3,500, but the forecast is $4,200. So I can easily see that I'm going to be over my budget infra. And what I also can do, I can group it by essentially cost center, by tags. And what you see here at the bottom, my cost center, 3,333, 2,222, and 1,111. And I also can see the amount of money I'm spending on untagged resources. So again, with Azure Cost, what you can do with proper tagging, you can track the success of your visibility phase implementation with pretty self-explanatory screens. Okay. With respect to operations, again, what we recommend is to focus on visibility with respect to capacity and availability alerts, and start investing in monitoring and troubleshooting dashboards and workbooks. For that, there's a great tool called Azure Monitor, and very close to my heart because UpInsight was part of that product. With respect to success metrics, you can basically track the percentage of infrastructure where you have some type of monitoring. Even if you have one alert created for that resource, that's considered to be a success. Then you're basically increasing the depth and various improving the health model for that particular resource. So as a very simple way we've seen companies implement a basic availability is through some type of ping test, like curl test. You may use Selenium testing, you may use some third-party tools, but Azure provides UpInsights with availability monitoring that you can use to effectively check from a number of places in the world whether your resource is up or down. Okay. We also recommend you to invest in Azure dashboards, and you see an example of Azure dashboard to basically eyeball the health of your infra. Essentially, you can look at it and say, well, this sounds fishy, and I need to dive deeper. And we also recommend you to implement workbooks to do more troubleshooting, because there's way more interactivity in workbooks than dashboards currently. And the last maturity phase is essentially security. Sorry, not maturity phase. The last pillar is security for visibility, and we recommend you to implement security alerts by implementing Azure Security Center. And you can, as a success metrics, track number of detected threats. You can measure secure score and how well you implement recommendations from Azure Security Center, from Azure Advisor. So what we recommend as a first step for this is to implement Security Center, specifically Defender. And that comes out of the box with over 600 alerts last time I checked. So if you recall System Center Ops Manager that provides essentially monitoring knowledge in terms of management packs, one of the values of those management packs is a predefined health model that consists of alerts that detect unhealthy state of the infrastructure. Well, Security Center has a similar kind of idea. When you enable it, it provides security monitoring for Windows, Linux, AD, Kubernetes, etc. A bunch of Azure services that would help you detect those threats. And also, Security Center provides you with essentially secure score. That's an indication of your security posture. So in this case, there is 21 out of 58 points, as you can see, and my total security posture, secure score is 37%. Whatever that means, but basically it means that you didn't implement certain recommendations from Microsoft, and by establishing a process to follow through that. Through those recommendations rigorously, you over time improve your secure score, but what's most importantly, you increase the depth of security. That's the name of the game. You cannot solve it, you just basically increasing the depth, making it harder to break in. Part of the visibility, and what we see some companies with I would say more resources than typical, they implement Azure Sentinel, because Azure Sentinel is a great tool when you have additional resources to detect threats. It's cross-platform, as you can see. For example, in my demo, I have even Amazon under monitoring. I'm hesitating suggesting it to implement at that level, at the visibility level, even though it's clearly for the visibility stage, just because it would require you to do a lot more management and a lot more hunting and incident management at the early stages of implementations. However, for completeness of the picture, I would say that it's a great tool to provide additional visibility monitoring into your Azure infrastructure and beyond. So quick recap. Financial management: organize resources under managed group hierarchy, define tags like business unit, service name or application name, LOB application name, owner, and define budgets and set up alerts. That's what we recommend for financial management. For operations, you need to set up resource and service health alerts and build monitoring dashboards and workbooks. And for security, Security Center is your friend. Just implement that.
So, Victor, I have a couple questions that have come across the audience. I'm going to try to pick out a few here real quickly. I mean, one of the questions we got is that so many cloud customers are concerned about losing control over their fixed cost ops with on-premise to variable cost ops in the cloud. What would be the best way to address that question from your perspective?
Well, first of all, that is true. It's a fundamental difference where you're transitioning from capital expenditure to operational expenditure. Typically, when we help customers to do the migration, we provide estimation and trying to align the infra to best to the workload. Also, we noticed that maybe it's a bigger secret that rehosting to the cloud will not give you economic benefits. In other words, if you basically take lift and shift, you might not see compelling financial numbers, even though Microsoft has great programs like hybrid benefits, like reserved instances for VM, SQL, cache, Redis cache, etc. So what we see is very effective, very efficient, is when you do the migration, you don't stop in just rehosting. You continue into refactoring, into re-architecting to capitalize on cloud elasticity, on fundamentally different approaches in cloud, like serverless. When you migrate not into VM, but let's say into containers, that also gives you lots of benefits. So again, it's a more multifaceted issue than just a simple yes, go to cloud and you will save a lot of money.
Right.
So,
well,
but great
so Victor, I was going to say, geez, we could do a whole nother webinar on cost optimization, but then I realized we did. And so if somebody's interested in that, we did a cost optimization webinar last month. It's available on our website to download. I mean, lots of topics, like you said, hybrid benefits, reserved instance. There are a lot of ways to kind of control cost in cloud. But as you said, there's no substitute for kind of, modernizing applications. Along the same lines, Victor, and then I'll let you go on the next slide, is somebody kind of talked about the fact that that a lot of companies move to cloud, as you just said, to save money. And this question is less about how do you measure that, which you guys, or how do you manage that, which you talked about, but at what stage in this maturity model do you think you're in a position to kind of give the feedback to the organization? What is the comparative cost of cloud versus on-premise?
Well, that's a good question. What's the comparative cost? You constantly monitor your TCO. As a matter of fact, many organizations, many mature organizations, that's the measure of their success migrating into cloud, lowering the TCO, where you include not only the infra, you include cost of resources that you employ to manage cloud. So it's again, at that, when you think about that, that's again pretty advanced topic that we recommend you to look into at the later stages when you kind of settle. Remember my example with OpenSite, when we started looking to COGS. Once we learn what the service, how the service is gonna look like, what features, functions, what value it brings, where we validated. When we had some validated learnings about our value, then we started optimizing many things: performance, SLA, cost, etc. Okay?
All right, I'll let you go on.
So the next phase is automation. But before we kind of go into automation, I'd like to introduce couple kind of terms that we use, because in many cases when people talk about automations, they talk about governance. And when we talk about governance, there are two very important aspects. Essentially, like I would say, recommendations, when you recommend something to be done in a certain way, versus a requirement where you enforce it. And the terms are guidelines versus guardrails. Guidelines is measured, basically you notify that something is out of compliance, versus guardrails where you prevent something from going in a compliance. And for example, we also differentiate between proactive, meaning you notify before something happened. An example could be, if you, in terms of guidelines, when you do a CI/CD deployment in a production, you may notify that, hey, you know what, there's going to be a potential problem, you violating certain things, versus reactive, where after you did the deployment, you notify that, well, it looks like you have open access to your storage account. That could be a notification after the fact. Versus guardrail, where you can block deployment. You can, for example, prevent customers to create Ultra SSD hard drives for their machines, right? Or you can correct it after the fact. For example, you do the deployment, and then you have a policy that enforces HTTPS connectivity to your web service. Whether that's a good example to auto-correct after the fact, I don't know, because it may break your application. But the point here is that there are certain things that you can correct after the fact. And that's essentially guardrails, reactive. So now with that kind of terminology, let's go into let's talk about automation phase and financial management. That's where you implement certain policies like requiring tagging or enforce like lowest cost region, etc. And what we recommend is, as you implement your cloud center of excellence, start with guidelines, and as you mature, transition to guardrails. For example, initially you basically report on policies that are not in compliance state. For example, that you have resources that are not properly tagged, and you nag your I don't know, dev leads or DevOps team to fix that. As you mature with your processes, as everyone in organizations gets used to that, you transition to more hardcore approach where you block deployment if there are no tags. Okay, and the success metric for that would be percentage of policies in compliance state, and essentially remediation time, how fast it is for you to fix that particular non-compliant stage. And this is an example of a policy where I have like 406 out of 488 in compliance state. So Azure policy is a great tool for you to use to measure your success and to codify your best practices. With respect to operations, Azure management stack mature over the years, and there are a lot of bells and whistles right now. For example, I'm pretty sure that in on-prem you've used WSUS, for example. There is update management in Azure. There is ability to use Azure automation to turn on, turn off your infrastructure. There is ability to enforce certain configuration using DSC, desired state configuration management, right? And you use how you implement that automation from the operation perspective. You use various tools. For example, you use Azure DevOps to implement CI/CD, and we believe, strongly believe, that at that point of maturity, all your services should have CI/CD automation, like all. You implement various Azure policies to kind of enforce best practices, right? Enforce certain automations. Azure automation to implement that update management, etc. And then you measure your success in terms of percentage of services that do have CI/CD, percentage of VMs in compliance state, etc. And here's an example, for example, where I'm showing you automation, Azure automation, where I'm looking at the update management, and it looks like I have 21 out of 47 VMs are in non-compliant state. This is an example of Azure Automation Scheduler where I have scripting to, as you can see, it's called like start VMs daily morning and stop VMs daily evening. That's where you invest into that kind of automation. And state configuration management, if you know that your infra should have certain things enabled, disabled, agent installed, whatever, you can use DSC to enforce that, right? ARM is isness. It's essentially what it is right now, and DSC brings this, it's called oughtness, what it should be, and enforces that, okay? So just security. From the security perspective, again, you can implement Azure automation, Azure policy to enforce certain best practices. For example, you can notify that public IP is being used for something. That could be a notification. Or you can block deployment if you have a storage account with OpenPort. Okay, so that's where, again, similar to financial management and operations, you would measure your success in terms of percentage of policies in compliant state, and also you can measure success in percentage of auto-remediated threats. In other words, you have an attack from some foreign country, and you block IP addresses automatically. Okay, so that's an example of auto-remediated threat. So, and here I have a screen from policy remediation, where you see that certain things have been automatically remediated. Quick recap for automation phase, on financial management, you basically need to enforce tagging and automate that process. Okay. On operations, think about start and stop your VMs or infrastructure. That is very useful. Set up automated update management, set up CI/CD. On the security front, create Azure Automation Runbooks to automate certain actions. You also, if you are investing in Azure Sentinel, basically investing into auto remediation through playbooks, also a great area to focus your attention to.
So, hey, Victor, I probably scared the audience when my picture pops just back up there, but I had lots of questions coming in, but I'm going to pick a few that I think might be interesting. One person asked this question about the perspective on when they should invest in a center of excellence and what are the drivers for establishing a center of excellence. And I just wanted, before I let you answer that, I mean, one of the things I'm hearing you say is, there is, when you start working in cloud, you should be thinking about not necessarily establishing this kind of formal best practice center of excellence, but you should be thinking in terms of how are you collectively going to provide this cloud center of excellence, capability to an organization, and what are the prioritized things you could do? Because again, nobody can do it all, but in terms of, I mean, is that accurate? I mean, or is there a point in time where, okay, now you start looking at this?
Well, I think from my perspective, you need to start educating yourself early as possible. There is a great resources on Microsoft called Azure Well-Architected Framework. I would recommend you to start reading those materials. From my perspective, the earlier you start thinking about like a methodical approach to implementing Azure, the better, because you start with proper landing zone. You start thinking about your security surface and exposure. You start thinking about cost at the early stages, and Cloud Center of Excellence, if you will, it's your forcing factor to formalize that process. Because Cloud Center of Excellence, it's also a process, like that collaboration aspect that where you establish like certain cadence where people come in and discuss and understand. Because I can tell you that we had customers with over almost 1.5 million in spend, and they had 26 leads. And introducing that Cloud Center of Excellence to that at the later stage would be much harder than introducing it at the very beginning, because you basically develop a muscle, and all those 26 very opinionated people should be educated ahead of time. So my point is that read more and start, if you are tasked with implementing cloud strategy, start thinking what would help you do that. Executive sponsorship is a must. Establishing cadence and collaboration cycle is a must. The essential Cloud Center of Excellence, it's not you waiting for them to come. It's you coming to them and help them to be more efficient, cost efficient, to be more secure, more aware.
Right. So the reality is there's never a good time to do it, because, as I said before, everybody feels like they've been punched in the mouth every day, and it's kind of hard to think about thinking proactively, but it's an issue of, am I too busy to be more productive? Because I think if I go back to the things you talked about under the visibility phase of the cloud maturity, of the Cloud Center of Excellence maturity model you were discussing, there's a lot of things you can do around visibility, but you're not suggesting they do everything. You're suggesting, hey, here's some things you can get started with. Just get started, right? Start putting in the framework, because as you said, when you get to 26 technical leads, it's like herding cats at that point, and you'll never get, it'll be way more friction and way harder. So the other question that I'll ask, and then I'll let you kind of keep going, because I know we're running low on time here, is you've mentioned a lot about kind of the tools and the data. You've shown some screens. I get the impression that these tools that are available throughout the Azure services tools and the dashboards and the workbooks and all, that seems to be pretty distributed across a lot of different places. Is there any way to kind of consolidate this information into a single place and like give myself a single pane of glass so I can kind of manage all this data? Is that even possible?
Well, first of all, your observation is correct. There's a lot of tools, and the single pane of glass is a never changing questions that any enterprise, at least enterprise organizations, has. And just to give you an example, you would assume that alert is a thing common in Azure. So Azure Monitor has alerting, and if you collect all those alerts into your ITSM ticketing system, you would be collecting all the signals. But guess what? Azure Cost has its own alerts. Security Center has its own alerts. Azure Sentinel has well, incidents. So it's not a trivial task, but it's definitely possible. And sometimes and we help customers essentially to consolidate all that signals into existing, for example, ITSM processes, and developing dashboards and workbooks, troubleshooting workbooks and monitoring dashboards is an area that also we believe would help with that, but it does require some effort.
Yeah, sounds like maybe a whole nother webinar topic, and this one we have not done yet, so maybe that's one to come. So I'll let you start bringing it on, Victor.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So good questions. So the last phase is the alignment, and that's where, as I mentioned, business comes into you and ask to support certain requirements, let's say COGS or SLA or some compliance, and at this point, it's pretty much custom. So what we've seen. So you have, for example, usage data. You can take something from cost management, from Azure Monitor, and bring it to Power BI. If you use CRM Dynamics, you can bring data from CRM Dynamics, and then you create Power BI reporting. And that's what we've seen customers doing. You measure success in terms of services with the COGS model. Essentially, you achieve that maturity level on service. And this is an example where there's a Power BI report on usage of Azure Hybrid Benefit, because for that company that was an important line item. That's how they measure success. Or usage of reserved instances. Again, this reporting can be very, very custom at this stage, at this maturity stage, and very tailored towards particular business needs. With respect to operations, that's where you start looking into OLA, operational level agreement, and SLA, customer facing agreements. And then that's where you use Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, you pull the data and potentially even pull data into, again, Power BI. And you measure as a success of your effort, you measure your SLA, and whether your services are compliant with your SLA. That's another customers we've seen measure Net Promoter Score. Basically, whether it's very standard questions. I'm sure that you've heard about it. Whether you would recommend this service to your friend, 1 through 10. So that's pretty tough question, quite frankly, to get a really high score. And that's what we've seen company use to measure their operational success. And with respect to SLA monitoring, here's an example of Microsoft being at very high level monitoring level, and they provide you service health monitoring, which is essentially their form of SLA monitoring that they give it to you. So you can see whether Microsoft is supporting their SLA. Okay. And the last piece is security. Security is essentially all those security compliance that you need to support. And Microsoft, as part of Azure policy, has lots of built-in security compliance definitions. So if you look at Azure policy, there is a let's say UK, there's no SOX, but there's ISO compliance, etc. So there's a number of compliance that you can, compliance definition that you can take and start tailored towards your business needs. And we recommend you to look into that once you get that requirements, but not before, because that's a pretty big effort. So quick recap on alignment from financial management: consolidate data and create custom Power BI reporting. On operations, define and report on SLA. And on security, pick pre-existing regulatory compliance definition and Azure policy and start tailoring them. So The last aspect of Cloud Center of Excellence is collaboration. I already touched upon that. You can, we've discussed that one of the biggest pain point is that the data is somewhat distributed, number one. Number two, everybody's using different channels. So for example, your developers might be using Azure DevOps or Jira. Your operations, your DevOps, SRE team could be using Slack or Teams, right? So your IT ops could be ServiceNow or Remedy for ticketing. So what is important is to establish appropriate tool chain for your organizations that would cover all those aspects and enforce accountability for everything. So, for example, you need to take all those signals, very useful signals from Azure Monitor, from Azure Cost, Azure Security Center, Advisor, Sentinel, and put them through the motions through ITSM systems where you can assign people, so enforce accountability. You can think about all those recommendations around security and performance and health, and process them through, let's say, Kanban board in Azure DevOps, right? Where if there is an LSI, if something goes down, you see availability goes down, you need to support ad hoc communications in Teams, for example, and you need to have everybody collaborating around the same topic. It just so happened that we have our own kind of tooling that we use internally to support our customers for our managed service, and that also you could use to basically integrate all those signals into a central place and integrate that into let's say Azure DevOps and Microsoft Teams. But collaboration, I would say, is one of the most important aspect overall, because it's very hard to establish new process, and how you collaborate internally is very important for success of your endeavor. So to just summarize, and I know that we're really short on time, in order to implement successful Cloud Center of Excellence team and strategy, you need to identify executive sponsorship and key internal and external stakeholders. The reason why I mention external stakeholders is that sometimes we see company use us as a forcing factor. So if you have MSP, talk to them and see if they could help you just establish that cadence, because you are busy with like a stream of noise of operational issues, and a third-party team might be very beneficial for you to establish, like every month or every 2 weeks we're sitting down and we're addressing these issues. So that was very useful for some of our clients. We recommend to start with baseline visibility and guidelines. Enforcing something at the early stages is hard. First, you need to listen. As Stephen Colby mentioned in one of his principles, understand before being understood. First, you listen, and then you implement some guardrails. So first, you need to be on the same page, collect the data so you can have a data-driven discussion, and focus on guidelines, on communications. And then the last piece, I cannot stress enough, facilitate collaborations. You need to talk with a lot of people, learn their pain points, and come to a win-win situation. So as the next step, what we recommend is to try our tool. We just we happen to have a free tool that gives you kind of idea how much money you can save, what's your security posture, and how well you monitor your infrastructure. And you see the URL for that tool. It's Azure Snapshot, www.viacode.com/Azure-Snapshot. And also, if you're interested, you can engage us in consultative assessment of your current state, and we can probably separately in a one-on-one discussion give you some pointers what we would see help.
Yeah, and Victor, that's great. And if you don't mind, Victor, just flip over to the next slide. I think it's important to show the audience this. And you guys, Victor, as Victor was saying, like, if one of the important things in an organization, you guys have asked a lot of great questions today about when do I get started and how do I know when I need to do it and how do I prioritize? I mean, All those are very difficult questions for us to answer for you in a 1-hour webinar. If you look at this snapshot dashboard, and again, you can go to this URL. There's no cost. It takes 30 seconds for you to run this, and it just grabs a quick snapshot. This is the kind of data that you can then use to take to your executive organization and say, this is why we need your sponsorship to build out our Cloud Center of Excellence, or the competencies that help us better manage costs, better secure our organization, and have better visibility, so that we're not losing sleep at night about wondering what's going to go wrong. And so there's no cost to this, but as a follow-on to this, we also offer an Azure optimization assessment. It's a full-blown assessment where we will come into the organization, and there's no cost. Why? There's a Microsoft sponsored program that allows us to kind of support this Azure optimization assessment. And from that assessment, you'll get a detailed report of prioritized recommendations for reducing cost, improving security, improving visibility. But along with that, we can also engage with you to help you figure out, how do I put in place the governance to help keep it that way? And these are all, again, the elements of building a Cloud Center of Excellence from the ground up. We can help you do all that. And we're happy to do a consultative conversation with you by phone. Even if you don't choose to engage us, you're likely to learn something that will be helpful and interesting. And so we would certainly kind of encourage you, if not us, don't go it alone, do it with somebody. There's a lot of people with deep expertise that can help you get started. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We'll have more topics coming. Please feel free to give us your feedback on this and other topics. And again, thanks a lot. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.